So I'm not crazy about the whole unboxing video trend. That's kind of a big hit on the YouTubes, but I finally managed to track something down that I'm pretty excited about, so I wanted to share this with you guys. It's finally here. Let's check it out. We have an 18-inch pinky stuffed owl. This is pretty cool. I think that's actually for a different video. Hang on. So as you could tell from all the woofing upstairs in the previous clip, our fat little dog is pretty excited about this too. So finally tracked down the right box. Let's see what's in here. One thing I did want to show you guys is these folks really knew how to pack. They did a great job. So if you're selling stuff and shipping it, take note. They got it done right here. They didn't just throw junk in a box to be crashing around and falling out all over. They did it right. So we've got a box, another box, a whole Northwest coast full of paper in there, and $25 pounds of pre-World War II awesome goodness. This here is a Potter Standard Duplex and some extra pieces. So hang on, I'm going to tear into these. We're going to put her together and check it out. This is pretty neat. So this is obviously the press here, and we have some extra good attachments in here. So I'm going to dig these out real quick. Use my cutty stabby here. And again, these folks did a good job packing. This was really nice of them. We got the cardboard and the bubbly wrap. Dog must went back to sleep. And some plasticky stuff. Get out of there. We have the cast powder measure and one die, two dies, three dies. This is pretty nice. I'm going to keep this for the wife's Christmas present next year. You know, fill those little shopping bag things with a little crinkly paper. Women like that. Hold on to that stuff. Four dies. And it appears to be a harmonica. I don't know. Let's check it out. I was wrong. It's not a harmonica. Shell plates. Ooh. Get off of there. Depriming rods. And a primer transfer bar. That's pretty cool. One thing we are missing though is the old make her go up and down handly thing on here. Didn't come with one, but you know, fear not. Where there is a will, there's a way, and where there's a garage and an Ace Hardware and power tools, we can make one. So I'm going to slap this thing together real quick. We're going to talk a little bit about it and then go through its functions. So the Potter Engineering Company produced reloading presses from mid 1930s all the way up through the 1960s, and they had a couple of different models. This one here is what's called the Potter Standard Duplex, And these are made from the 30s up until I think the 50s, somewhere in there. I should check on that. But this is actually one of the little bit earlier ones. And I know that because the powder measure, for one, is cast iron, and it's stamped Potter Engineering Company, Syracuse, New York. And then the base on the press is also stamped Syracuse, New York. And the Potter Company was there in Syracuse up until about 1941, and then they moved to a different town in New York, and eventually in 51 moved to Florida, where they were for the remainder of their operational years. And so, you know, while this casting says Syracuse on it, you know, they could have had some leftovers and maybe produced it a little bit later after they left Syracuse. It also has a serial number, and this is number 133. So this is pretty early on in the production. Best that anybody can recall, there are about 600 of these standard duplexes made. So this is a fairly early on one. The best information about these is an article by Ken Waters that was in the Hand Loader's Digest. I think this is the 1987 one. It's Don't Pass Up a Potter by Ken Waters. And there's a lot of really good details in there, kind of about how these work, the different models, and numbers of them made and how to date them. So this one is likely pre-World War II, which is pretty cool, and you know, fairly early on. There were, I think, 4 different models similar to this that Potter made. This one is one of the higher produced number. The Potter automatic, I think they made about 1,500 of. The standard duplex they made about 600, and everything else is a little bit lower. But still, compared to numbers of presses, you know, produced today, that's pretty neat that these are still around. In my 1940 Stoger catalog reproduction here, there's the Potter Duplex model listed in here, and in 1940 the complete machine with a set of dies sold for about $35. In 2021 dollars, that's right around 650 bucks now. So think of this as comparably priced to, you know, kind of your basic Dillon 750 or a, you know, really tricked out Dillon 550. So comparable in price to what we have around today. This one has what we'd call kind of a semi-progressive, I suppose. There's multiple stages and multiple functions that happen at once, but you do have to manually swap the cartridges between stations. And so I'm going to put this together real quick here. I'm going to stick our handle up on top. Need a screwdriver, and there's a little screw that tightens down on that, and then on this side is where the powder measure goes. Wing nut comes off of here, and then goes in the casting on the back of there, and then that throw is actually actuated by the movement of the handle here. So if I get the measure and the arm lined up there, the index together, put the wing nut back on there. Now, every time I move the arm, it activates the powder throw, which, you know, you kind of have to be on top of your toes, because if it's hooked up on here, if you're just depriming or something, not paying attention, it's going to dump a powder charge. The measure is actually adjustable inside of here. There's a little drum with a set screw on it. You can move in and out to change your powder charge. This one is currently set up in 30-06. So there's a 30-06 shell holder, 2 dies. This one is D-prime and neck size only. And then this is bullet, seat, and crimp. To D-prime, and I'll run through the function here in a minute. You'd set your case in the first station there. Remember, you're going to dump powder, so have something underneath there to catch it. Punch the primer out, raise the handle back up, activate this arm, which is going to move a primer from the primer tube position here. I'm actually missing the primer tube, unfortunately, on this one. The spent primer is going to come out the front, drop down inside the base. New primer is now indexed into station 1. Move the handle forward or towards you, and that was going to seat the primer there. So pretty neat operation on this. It's all cast iron, weighs pretty good chunk, something like 25 pounds. Unfortunately on mine, I was missing the original handle. There is a broken spring underneath here, and kind of the natural resting position. This handle, the primer handle, should be back away from the operator. That allows the spent primer to get captured down in there. That spring is broken, and I can't manage to drive out the pins underneath there to get that fixed quite yet. So got that issue, and then unfortunately I'm missing the primer tube on there as well. But it is pretty cool that I've got sets of dies here as well. So I've got one that's marked 257 and one that's marked 220. And both of my shell holders here are marked 22. One is for a large primer and one is a small primer though. So I don't, maybe a 257 Roberts, I haven't really tried that out yet. And the 220 Swift maybe. Again, I haven't checked those out yet, but pretty neat. Primer transfer bar, have the small one of those, large ones installed, and then a couple extra depriming rods. That's pretty neat because these guys get broken quite a bit. So I'm going to clear all the rest of this stuff off of here, and we're going to run a cycle through here and show you how it operates. Alright, so I'm going to get everybody in here all nice and close so you can see what's happening and you don't have to look at me. So it's a win-win here. Like I mentioned, this one is set up in 30-06 currently. We have the powder measure, powder drop here, in station, what I'd call station 1, I guess, or the middle function. I don't know, call it what you want. We have decapping and neck sizing, and then this is also where we would prime. And then in the third station over here on the far right is the bullet seat and crimp position. So I have a 30-06 casing here, and what I'm going to do is run through each function here real quick. So remember in the first station here, as I actuate the handle, the linkage on the powder measure here catches, and that would dump our powder charge. Remember that it dumps every single time you actuate the handle unless you actually physically remove the powder measure. Luckily I don't have anything in here, so it's not going to be dumping each time I do that. And I mentioned that if my spring in the base here wasn't busted, this handle, the priming handle, would be in its back or away position naturally. Since that spring is busted, it tends to move up here. But if I hold it here and place a case in position 1, in the first position of the shoulder, bring the handle down. We're now engaging the neck sizing, and I felt it push the primer out there. Pull the handle up, and if I pull the cartridge out of there, you can see the spent primer is now captured in here. If I had a live primer setting in here in the primer feed position, I'm going to drop another used one in there, and I move the handle, would be back toward me, or toward the front of the press. I'm going to transfer the new primer into this position here, and the spent primer, you can watch, come forward and falls through a hole into the base of the press. Now you would either, there's a couple options here. You'd either every once in a while unbolt the press off your bench, pull it up, clean out the spent ones, before you fill it all up and gum it all up. You could drill a hole in your bench so they'd fall through the hole into a can underneath or something. And then there was actually an optional base for some of these that set it up a little bit and had a little drawer underneath there. You'll see those once in a while, so you just pull that drawer out and collect the spent primers that way. So those are kind of cool. They're not on every press, but you'll see them out there. So casing's now deprimed. If this was a live primer, my case was still in here, actuate this handle, push that new primer up into the case, and now we have a primed piece of brass. So if I move this handle and nothing's in the way and put my pick in there, there's a little primer seating punch that comes up through the base there. So that's pretty cool. would take my cartridge, move it to the next station. We have our bullet, and set it on top. Bring the handle down. Loaded round. So if you're a keen observer, you would notice I got something out of sequence there. So what I would actually want to do, grab another piece of brass here. I went across the functions from left to right. That's not the correct sequence, because if I did that, I would have a casing full of powder that then I would move into this position, try to punch the old primer out through the powder, bring it in. So the correct order of operations would be to deprime, size there, seat my new primer, push that used one back in there, move over, dump my powder, come here, seat my bullet. So you kind of hop between from the middle to the powder to the seat. You can certainly do that with cartridges in each position. In fact, that's what you'd really want to do to keep up with things. Otherwise you're dumping powder out on your bench here, and there's not a way to shut that off again without, you know, disconnecting it. So there's a fair amount going on here. You kind of have to keep your wits about you and you know, try not to make a mess. To change out calibers, to load something different, this one's set up in large primer, but there's a small primer slide as well. That's this piece, same thing, just small primer hole. Take out these 3 screws here, swap out the shell plate. So there's a different shell plate. And then you'd change out your dies. These are 7/8 diameter dies, but they're not the 7/8 14 that's kind of standard now. I think they're 7/8 18 threads per inch, so a little bit finer thread. You know, this was before kind of the standard die setup. You could, you know, simple enough that you could have somebody machine these if you really needed to, and you can find them every once in a while. The other thing to note is that because the arrangement of the linkage here and the handle is above, the lock ring is on the bottom of the top here that holds the die. So you have to put your lock ring on your die, thread the die up, and then use that on the bottom to lock it down. And so that's the way this is set up. And you know, this is kind of what we'd consider unusual now, because the dies come down on top of the cartridge, as opposed to most reloading press setups now. The cartridge comes up into the die, and the die is held stationary. A few of the other variations, there's an automatic, one that has a slot cut in the base here, and there's a linkage rod, and all the primer mechanism is automatic on there. There's a couple of variations of that, and I'll post some pictures of the other ones, but I think there were basically 4 different Potter presses, and then there was maybe 1 or 2 kind of one-off or prototypes. They also made some other accessories. I've seen a hardness tester, there was a melting pot, and some other gizmos. So that's kind of the story on the Potter. So hopefully you all have watched my video about the CV Schmitt number 12, this really cool reloading press that came out again in the 40s in Minneapolis, where it was manufactured. If you haven't watched it, you need to go watch it. This is one of my favorites. This thing's pretty cool. Maybe related to that, well, the fact they both came out of Minnesota, I just found this. This is pretty nifty. This isn't a reloading press, but it's a priming device. Automatic primer seater. This thing is pretty cool. I'm going to talk about this in my next video, I think. So, again, you guys, thanks for watching. I really appreciate it. Any comments or questions or suggestions, throw them out there. I like interacting with you guys. So, thanks for sticking through. I appreciate it.